Hello everyone. So now we're going to start Chapter 5, Introduction to Natural Hazards. We're skipping Chapter 4, we're not going to be completing that one, so that's not going to be on your exam. This Chapter 5 will be though. Now this Chapter 5 it's getting introduced into kind of the terminology used in describing hazards, what makes a hazard, what makes a disaster. We'll look at some frequencies, and we'll look at kind of the general response and kind of preparedness for hazards and disasters. Then after our exam, throughout much of the rest of the semester, we'll be looking at actually specific types of hazards and disasters. So earthquakes, volcanoes, landslides, a whole wide varieties of things like this. First though, let's define what a natural hazard actually is. Well, natural, that part of it, this is occurring from normal Earth processes. This can be influenced by what people do. This can be triggered by what people do. But this is a otherwise naturally occurring Earth process. So again, earthquake, volcano, landslides. We contrast this with what we call technological hazards. Technological hazard would be more like almost entirely human-made, done with human-made things, building collapses, gas line explosion, traffic accident. War can kind of fall into technological hazards because you're using, your aircraft and artillery and things, things made by people. It is occurring with artificial things, so it's not occurring with natural things. So that's the natural part. The hazard part, hazard just refers to any process, any event. It poses a life or a threat to life or property. So it's something that can hurt us or hurt our stuff. If it doesn't pose a threat, if it's occurring way far away from people and isn't going to affect people in any way, it's technically not a hazard. It is just whatever event it is. So we need these two things. It needs to be naturally occurring. We need it to be threatening us. So that's just for a hazard. What makes a hazard into a disaster then? Not all hazards are disasters, just like not all processes are hazards. For an event to be a natural disaster, this is our official terminology here. It's, of course, a natural event. It needs to meet one of the four following criterion. It needs to kill 10 or more people. It needs to affect 100 or more people. So this can be loss of property, loss of water supply, some resource, things like this. So it's affecting 100 or more people. There has to be a declaration of emergency issued. This is usually you think of as being as a state level, federal level. Other countries, this is your federal government level. The other thing is if a request is made for international assistance. So this is where the country itself can't handle it. It's getting international assistance. Obviously, in the U.S., we don't make many requests like this. We've got a lot of resources available to us. Other countries, though, smaller countries, oftentimes that's where you have international assistance, especially for countries where you're getting, say, a big earthquake. We don't have too many huge ones here in the U.S. Other countries that get big ones, they're going to have a lot of cleanup from that. So they're going to request international aid. So you just need one or more of these things. Oftentimes you'll get several of these. But 10 or more people killed, I don't want to downplay people being killed, but 10 isn't a whole lot compared with maybe thousands, tens of thousands, and some of these really big disasters. 10 or more people killed can be from a tornado. 100 people affected, again, a lot of tornadoes meet that criteria. So we think of tornadoes as being maybe smaller events affecting small areas. They can still be natural disasters. So we got hazards, we got disasters now. If we apply this criteria to to hazards to events around the world. In 2012, we would find there were 382 things that we would call natural disasters. This number is you can get a lot of different figures for this due to a few factors we'll discuss here shortly. 382 tends to be a good agreed upon number. If we look over the past 100 years, this little figure we've got on this page, this is from MDAT.be, which is the International Disaster Database. This shows the number of disasters reported from 1900 to 2011, so about 100 years. Several of the following figures will be on the same time scale. We see that we've got this somewhat increasing trend in disasters. It's actually increasing for the most part. It's kind of dropped in the past decade a little bit, kind of going down, but we still got we got a big increase, especially comparing, say, 1900, where you just have a handful. It's like maybe 10. Compare that with, say, well, our 382. Raises a good question. Why is the frequency of disasters increasing over this time scale? If we look at some of our criterion for disasters, people killed versus people affected, we think, all right, maybe it has to do with more population, so more people are being killed. In general, though, the number of people reported killed by natural disasters over that time span is actually decreasing. Some of our earlier disasters, again, going back to, say, 1900, you've got, it looks like about 1.2 million people killed. 2010, you're at maybe 300,000 killed, which is still a sizable number, but we've got a downward trend here. If we look at people affected, we see we're back to this increasing trend, though. Not many reported in the early 1900s, getting more, we're getting up to hundreds of millions for some of these in the past decade. So number of disasters is increasing. People killed is decreasing. People affected is increasing. Property damage is also increasing. We got two figures here. First one on the left is the 100-year figure. The one on the right is just looking at the past about 30 years. Both of these we're seeing this increase. What's interesting with these two figures is that for some of these recent disasters, you see little colored bars on here. At the blue, instead of just red, we got green, pink, brown. These are looking at specific events. So in 2005 here, this green, that represents the damage in US billions of dollars caused by Hurricane Katrina. So that was a big chunk of that for this year. It's a little over half. In 95, we got the Kobe earthquake. In 2008, we had the Sichuan earthquake, which is in China. In 2011, we had the Honshu tsunami. So this is the 2011 Tohoku quake. So we got a few big disasters that are kind of kicking this up, but if we look to other years where we don't have big disasters, we've still got this increase. So again, another increase in time. So what's explaining these trends? Why do we have more natural disasters? Why are more affected, more property damage, but people killed is going down? Well, one reason for the increase in disasters, number of disasters, is that we got better reporting now. We can find out about disasters affecting other areas of the world, maybe isolated areas of the world. Remember, to be a disaster, 10 people killed, 100 people affected. These events are happening in isolated areas. It may not have global ramifications, so you may not just inherently know about it. Now with, just instant communication, we can connect to just about every area of the world, and we can find out about these disasters. So just more reporting has led to this apparent increase in disasters. Regarding some of the numbers of affected and killed and things, we have had an increase in population. We have had an increase in urbanizations. We have more people more people living together. So if that small area that's urbanized now has more people living in it, if it's affected by a disaster, affected by a hazard, it's easier for that hazard to reach disaster threshold. So just having more people needing more property, needing more places to live, just having homes, more people is going to be affected. It can be easier for an event to reach that threshold. So maybe the number of events hasn't really changed over the past 100 years, but the number of those events that go from being just an event to being a hazard, and then from a hazard to being a disaster, we're kind of bumping that portion of it up. We've also done a lot to change the land, kind of related to this increasing population, having to live in more maybe hazardous areas, having to change the landscape to build homes on it. We've increased risk of landslides in some places. We have, caused increased erosion for some coastal areas, so you have increased landslide risk there. We can do things to change land to make it more likely for, say, a wildfire to happen. And that wildfire, can spread, can become a disaster. So we're changing the land related to this increase in population. That can increase the risk of certain types of hazards, and then can increase the risk of those disasters. And then one other thing that's playing a role is climate change. We have a warming climate. This is well established. This is warmer now than it was 100 years ago, than it was 150 years ago. Putting more thermal energy into the atmosphere, into the oceans, and it alters the dynamics of storms. So this can change intensities of storms, change storm patterns sometimes. The exact numbers, it's still really kind of hard to figure out. But we know that these storms are sparked by thermal energy. So increasing it, we can affect maybe some of these frequencies. We know we have sea level rising related to this climate change. Even a small rise of a few inches can increase, say, coastal erosion. Can make it so, say, hurricanes go from being hazards to being disasters. Can increase damages in that regard. So these four things all kind of work together to kind of contribute to some of this, the increasing, decreasing trends we've seen. Increasing in disasters, in dollar damage, number affected. What about the killed, though? Shouldn't the killed also be increasing if we've got increasing in population and doing all this stuff? Well, we actually have better understanding of hazards and disasters today. We are raising awareness. We are able to evacuate people sometimes. Better construct homes that don't collapse as easily. So we've got more population. We've got more people being affected. Fewer people being killed due to education and getting the word out and knowledge. So this will wrap up our kind of just what is a hazard. Next time we will look at a few other kind of related concepts to hazards. We'll look at magnitudes, and we will look at catastrophes. So come back and I will see you then.